My name is Gabriel Fain of Gabriel Fain Architects, and together with my colleagues here from Studio Varro, Francesco Valente-Goriup and Alaris Rogers, we'd like to introduce you to our year-long research and design project entitled On the Courtyard, which is the inaugural project of Impossible Toronto, initiative generously funded by the Neptus Foundation. Zoe, thank you so much. And it'll result in a publication both on a web platform and in print, and an exhibition in the fall. So in this project, we propose to introduce a new built form to Toronto, that of the courtyard block. It's been proven successful for centuries in Europe, and it provides a really high quality of life. It's also one that, as tourists, we kind of marvel over when we visit great European cities. And we ask ourselves, why can't we have this back at home? It's now impossible to build in Toronto for a variety of reasons. On the Courtyard is primarily a design proposal and a starting point for further conversation. In it, we try to explain as many different facets of planning policies and provincial codes and regulations that currently constrain mid-rise development, and to imagine the kind of broad-scale changes that are needed if this type of concept is to become possible in Toronto. It's key to note that everything that we're showing in terms of sketches and discussion is in fact possible somewhere else. So it's really important also to show that this was a collaborative effort over the last almost year, and we brought together experts, leading experts in the field, and both locally and internationally. We have architects, engineers, landscape architects, code specialists, writers, academics, developers, planners, and even one of the most revered architecture critics in our own city here. So our project began with a comprehensive examination of European courtyard blocks and identifies opportunities for and challenges to their integration into Toronto's urban landscape. The European courtyard block comes in many different scales and configurations. So we examined 5 key European cities: Basel, Switzerland, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, and Copenhagen. Through this research, we discovered 6 key courtyard types shown on the right here. We observe considerable diversity within the blocks despite their comparable scales. Some blocks are clearly bound and feature a large central courtyard, and others are denser and less rigidly structured. So in considering which type of courtyard block would best adapt to Toronto's context, we actually found that Basel, Switzerland model actually quite suitable, as its block sizes and right-of-way widths could most easily be adapted to our Toronto context. So shown here are actually 4 different blocks in Basel, Switzerland, a city where my colleagues here actually lived for many years, working at one of the top architecture firms in the world. We also studied in great detail the proportions of the main streets these buildings fronted onto. And what we all find appealing about these streets are how remarkably narrow and dense they are. The relative proportion of the buildings to the right-of-way would break all Toronto planning policies. And we actually kind of veered towards the image on the left, which is a kind of middle ground in terms of the scale of the buildings relative to the right-of-way. The image on the right from Paris is fantastic. We love it. But it's a bit too extreme for our Toronto context. So we looked at many precedent buildings, like this one in Basel by Bruckner Bundler, and redrew them actually to study how they work. These buildings usually sit next to each other, creating a continuous street wall. Inside, they contain highly livable units with dual exposure to light and air. Typically, they're 6 stories. These buildings prioritize efficient layouts. They rely on minimal setbacks, single stair access, and reduced core sizes to maximize space. We looked at how these precedent buildings engage with the courtyard and how the courtyard often functions as a kind of amenity space. Sometimes it's shared and sometimes it's actually private. We interviewed every single architect who designed the buildings in the images on the screen to find out how they create actually such high-quality housing, we discovered so many things that are literally impossible to replicate in Toronto. So we returned to Toronto, where we took 4 Toronto blocks and used them as a kind of baseline against which to compare and test the European courtyard block concept. All are located along major streets and will likely, due to recent changes in policy under EHON, be zoned for buildings up to 6 stories. So the key moment for us is where we did a kind of stress test of our own building design, of our own courtyard building design, and compared it against what we're calling an EHON building, and discovered that although these are new and improved policies we have, they're still extremely limiting to create buildings that are great and great cities. And so I'll pass it off to Francesco to take a deep dive into our design proposal.
Great, thanks, Gabriel. So starting right off with the design, this is the Toronto block that we chose to test the master planning concept of transporting the courtyard block, and we also used it to test our design proposal. It's located at Bathurst and Harvard. It's a typical Toronto block that has single-family detached and semi-detached homes with garages. It's divided by a lane, and it had the ideal dimensions to house a courtyard block for Toronto. Mainly, it's 82 meters wide by 172 meters long, with a 4-meter lane dividing it. From the very beginning, the master planning idea was really intended to be thought of as an incremental evolution over time. So starting on the left, you can see the existing urban fabric, and slowly, as things evolve, 2-by-2 buildings with higher density and greater height populate these sites, eventually creating 2 courtyard blocks for this specific Toronto site. So fast forward 35 to 40 years, this is what it would start looking like, with 6-story buildings located around the perimeter, along the streets, and with 4-story lower buildings located along the laneway, coming together to form 2 distinct courtyard blocks, each with their own landscape clearly defined within them. Furthermore, after the master planning setup, we decided to further investigate the actual architectural expression of one of these courtyard blocks, namely focusing on the design of 2 buildings that form one site. It takes this expression in section, with the 6-story building on the right, located on the major street. This building is expressed in wood, a wood facade that's stained blue. It comes to lot line, creates a strong street wall, and the idea is to activate the ground plane, the urban realm, with a mix of at-grade units and commercial spaces like cafes and retail. On the laneway side, the 4-story building, highlighted in pink, has a different vibe. Our building, proposed in the light pink wood with punched openings, has units at grade as well as live-work units. It's a pedestrianized zone. It has a brick groundscape. It has a slightly grittier vibe, more intimate scale. The key consideration, of course, is how these 2 buildings relate to each other. Porosity and transparency was important, how the major street could connect to the courtyard and how the laneway to the courtyard and vice versa. So here's a view entering the street side building with the open stair on the left, with a visual and physical connection back to the courtyard as well as to the laneway in the distance. The ground floor plan, which is greatly characterized by the idea of maximizing at-grade units, is strongly connected to the courtyard and to the landscape. It was designed in conjunction with Mark Ryan at Public Work. It's an anchoring space and one that was very much conceived of evolving incrementally over time, like the built form itself. So on day 1, it's imagined really as an island onto itself, where more intimate outdoor patios are carved out of the landscape for the at-grade units, and the lush vegetation provides relief for the units above. While over time, as more and more buildings fill this courtyard block, the landscape could expand and become essentially a courtyard-wide amenity for everybody to share. Moving up to a typical floor plate, they're characterized by shallow floor plate depths. The laneway building on the left is 10 meters deep. The front major street building is about 12.5 meters deep, and this allows for 2 units per floor plate, as is typical in Europe of buildings at this scale. and really allows for a through unit configuration with access to daylight and ventilation on 2 facades. Oops, sorry. Okay, and the living spaces of the units are oriented towards the courtyards. So this is looking from the street side building back towards the laneway. And the bedrooms instead are off of the street and the laneway with either Juliet balconies or punched windows to provide ample ventilation and daylight. Tested numerous unit configurations and layouts. On the laneway side, we landed for a 3-bedroom and a 1-bedroom as a typical configuration. And on the right, on the larger building, we did 2-bedroom configuration as a standard, again, with the bedrooms off the major street and the living spaces off the courtyard. This is a view in that building of that 2-bedroom looking through from the living space back towards the kitchen and towards the bedrooms in the distance on the left, catching a glimpse of that Juliet balcony on the left side bedroom, and turning around, looking back towards the courtyard, towards the laneway building with the spiral stair that you can see there behind the curtain. And of course, given the scale of these buildings, balconies are in fact fabulous places. They're not windswept, they're places you want to be, and there's an extension of the living space onto these balconies, which create a more intimate experience of the outdoors compared to the more communal landscape of the courtyard below. I'll pass it on to Alaris Rogers to talk about the big 3.
Thank you. So I'm here to deliver the bad news, which is that none of this is actually possible in Toronto today. So our scheme violates all sorts of zoning bylaws, building codes, as well as even cultural expectations about how we should live or how the city should operate. So what we've done in our research is identify 3 key categories that identify changes needed in order to overcome the obstacles to this type of missing middle construction. We call them the big 3, and the first of the 3 is probably the most straightforward category, called setbacks. In this case, we have a typical EHON building on the left side, which is probably the best case scenario you could get, building with the major street study guidelines. In this case, it essentially looks like a single-family house on steroids, 6 stories tall, but still functioning as an island in the middle of the lot, neither engaging with the street nor the laneway behind. And you also have significant side yard setbacks. What do you really do with these side yards? No one knows. So we're instead proposing 0 side yard setback in order to really create the consistent street wall that both Francesco and Gabriel mentioned, and as well as very reduced front and rear yard setbacks, allowing the building to really get up close to the street, close to the laneway, while still allowing for some minor setbacks to increase the size of the laneway and also allow for vegetation and planting along the street. But that gives much more space to the courtyard, which is where we think we need it. The next overarching big 3 category is we're calling maximizing efficiency, and this is really about trimming space out of the building that is maybe not so useful, that we could return that space to the what we really want, which is space for living. So we see the core as really ripe for pruning. So on the left, you have diagrams contrasting a typical European style core with a North American style core for a 6-story building. And as you can see, the core on the left, the European, is less than half the size of our Toronto cores. So that's a considerable space savings right there, and that's largely due to the fact that their elevator is about half the size of ours, and about a third of the cost, and they also rely primarily on single stairs, which I know is going to be a big topic today. So those are what we're proposing for our building, single stair, which is also open on the corridor, another violation of codes. But in the image, as you can see on the right, we believe that really creates a very attractive stair people are more likely to use, and it kind of fosters a community around that stair. So moving on, another area where we'd love to see reduction in kind of area occupied within buildings is in waste storage and other amenities. So using waste specifically as an example, waste storage rooms typically take up a lot of space inside and out the ground floors of these types of housing. And we'd love to see that space returned to the units, or potentially even on the diagram on the lower left side to commercial space instead. And what we propose is actually to move waste, either reduce the space and move to the basement, or even better, move it into the public realm, Right now, waste rooms are decentralized, placed in each individual apartment building. We'd love to see it centralized along the street. In what you can see on the right-hand side is a typical European centralized garbage solution. It looks like municipal bins, but actually conceals underground collection bins, which the street trucks can just pick up as needed. So the next and final big category of the big three is low tech. So it's something that is talked about quite commonly in Europe. And essentially, in the same way that maximizing density advocated for reducing area of certain elements inside the building, low tech calls for paring down and simplifying buildings by using fewer and more sustainable materials. Low tech does not mean no tech, but rather an efficient and sufficient use of technology within buildings, relying more on passive systems rather than active mechanical and technological systems. So that has a lot to do with our principles of sustainability for the building, but obviously a lot to do with the mechanical systems themselves. So what you see here is a typical mechanical system for a 6-story building in Toronto. Incredibly complex, requires a lot of coordination. It also has a spatial impact inside of the units themselves, requiring bulkheads and things like that, which as architects, we're trying to avoid all of this, right? So what we propose instead is, again, a much smaller footprint HVAC system, which again is centralized above the entry and washroom to each unit. So the system would rely first and foremost on passive heating, cooling, ventilation. The system would kick in just when those are no longer sufficient. And as you can see in the image on the right, it's very well integrated in this sort of drop ceiling, concealed kind of within the depth of the beams. So super minimal footprint, no ducts, and just a lot less complexity and coordination required. And lastly, within the low-tech category, you put fire protection, because typically in mass timber buildings, which is what we're proposing for the structure of our project, within Ontario, you need to clad most of that wood in drywall, and it also provides sprinklers. We were really inspired when we saw some of these Swiss precedents, and we also spoke with Swiss fire engineers. There, they use more of a performance-based fire protection framework in which there's kind of trade-offs. So in order to reduce or have very little encapsulation of the CLT, no sprinklers, you just need a high fire rating between buildings. So that was something we would love to see here in Ontario, more of a performance-based system, and that's what we're proposing in our building. No sprinklers, the CLT is exposed. Okay, and the last but not least, kind of a big one, the pro forma. So even if we could get beyond all these regulatory hurdles that I've just outlined, the numbers still need to work, right? So Brandon Donnelly of Globazin ran a couple of pro formas for us, comparing the numbers for an EHON scheme and an art courtyard block. And sadly, sadly the slide is not working. Oh, there we go. Sadly, neither works. If you look at the two columns on the left, it's possibly because we have a very expensive site downtown, but I think that's exactly where you want this kind of density. So Brandon did find that as soon as you start to remove about $1.5 million from the budget, which could be accounted for in land transfer tax, development charges, parkland fees, and site plan control, then the numbers work. So it's clear that something big has got to give if we want to see any of this kind of construction in the near future in Toronto. Okay, so just to wrap it up, as Gabriel started off by saying, we got into this project asking, why can't we have this at home? And I think we now understand the many factors that stand between us and the courtyard blocks. But it also raised quite a few new questions for us. But what we know for sure is that we would love to see urban policies in the city that not only increase density, but also push for more vibrant, higher quality housing. So yeah, and as Gabriel said, our book and website will be published in September, I think. And we'll have 200 plus pages of more information for you. So we tried to condense it all in 15 minutes. That was a challenge. But thank you so much for your time, and we hope you have some questions for us.